Hi everyone, it's Nicki from Filestage, and today I'm joined by Tyler Hakes, and we're going to talk all things content strategy. Tyler has been living and breathing content for over 15 years. He's built his own content marketing agency, Optimist, up to over $1.5 million yearly revenue. He runs an incredible online community for content marketers, which I'm part of, called TOFU, and I highly recommend. And he's recently launched a new course for content marketers called the Six Figure Strategist. So, Tyler, thank you very much for your time today. How are you?
Hey Nikki, thanks so much for having me. I'm doing pretty well. How are you?
I'm good. I'm excited for this. This is a topic I'm super interested in, and I think I'm going to learn a lot. So, yeah, I'm excited to get started.
Yeah, likewise. I think everything is content, I think, at the end of the day, right? So
We got a lot to cover, but we're going to get in there. Before I get into the nitty gritty questions, I wanted to ask how you landed in content marketing. Like, what was your journey? How'd you get here?
yeah, so I was one of the perhaps unlucky or perhaps lucky, depending on how you look at it, folks who studied journalism in college, right around the time where media was really having a difficult time. I mean, still is, but so yeah, I graduated from college with a degree in journalism. And I don't think you could pay someone to be a journalist at that time, so I didn't really have a lot of job opportunities in journalism, but fortunately at that time, content marketing was sort of picking up as a practice, and more companies were taking it more seriously, and I sort of fell into it. Honestly, a lot of the skills and things that I learned in journalism school and as a writer by trade were obviously applicable. So from there, just kind of started in marketing and kind of worked my way through the process there, and I've been in content marketing ever since.
And here we are. Awesome. Yeah, there were so many transferable skills from journalism, so it's actually a super good base to start with. So the next thing I want to do, I want to just debunk a content myth, at least one up the right at the top here. And I wanted to ask you, is there one common sort of content best practice that you actually disagree with or you think leads teams astray?
Mm. Yeah, it's a good one. I honestly, we could probably spend the whole interview just talking about this, but not that people are necessarily doing things wrong, but I think a lot of people don't really have a framework or a system for how to approach content marketing, and so what they do is they sort of glom onto what they see other people doing, and I think that's probably the biggest like best practice that we see that a lot of people are getting wrong is that that they're sort of substituting a competitive analysis for a real strategy, right? So they look at what their competitors are doing or what content their competitors are making or what keywords they're ranking for, and then they just copy and paste that and decide that's the content we're going to make too, right? We want to beat our competitors, so we're going to go after those same keywords. We're going to write those same blog posts. We're going to do exactly what our competitors are doing, which there's nothing wrong with doing that as a part of your strategy. But I think the step that's missing there is having a strategy, right? Really figuring out what are we actually trying to accomplish with content and how are we going to do it? And is this the best way, right? I think that's where you sort of really start to move astray, if you will, as you said, because you don't have that strategy to kind of anchor what you're doing. And so you're just copying things to copy them because it's what the competitors are doing or it's what somebody else or what worked for somebody else.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think that's the biggest one is that over the years, many people have published workflows and processes and case studies about, hey, here's what we did. We went out and we scraped all the keywords that our competitors are ranking for, and we threw it in a spreadsheet and we just, wrote 1,000 blog posts. But they haven't really figured out the first step of like, why are we doing
The why
that?
behind it all. Yeah, I love that.
Yeah.
I agree completely, especially when it's smaller brands maybe copying the plays of big brands. It's like
Oh, geez. Yeah.
you're not playing the same game, unfortunately.
Yeah. The joke always is like, your CEO wants you to like market like Apple with like, and your budget is literally an apple.
Yeah, I think everyone watching this will understand that pain. And they might understand the next pain that I want to bring up, which is one that I have personally struggled with, and it is the idea of like content sprawl or distinguishing between when you're just filling your content calendar and when you're doing things that are strategic that actually move the needle and make sense. So I wanted to ask you if you have a process for deciding what not to create.
Yeah, well, that's a great segue because I think, coming back to what we were just talking about and sort of the idea of having a strategy, having some kind of a big picture vision of what we're doing, and then being able to say, does this fit in that box or not? So I think, one of the things, again, going back to like the process and not to like belabor it too much, but I think just sitting down and having like a documented strategy is so valuable, right? Again, it seems like it's just sort of a formality, but it's so valuable as you move through the process, as you work with stakeholders and they want a million different things, and you have to be able to say like, this is a priority, this is not a priority. Being able to say, hey, look, our strategy is A, B, and C, and unfortunately X, Y, and Z aren't part of that strategy right now. Um, and just to clarify, I think a strategy. I think a lot of people think a strategy is like a content plan, or all of these like sort of supporting documents for your strategy. Really, a strategy itself is just a few components, right? Sometimes it's just a few sentences, right? It's just like, here's the problem that we're trying to address, and here's how we're trying to address it, right? So all of your personas and your content plan and all of that stuff, again, that's just supporting documentation. Your strategy doesn't have to be anything super fancy, but it does need to be documented.
Yeah.
So you sit down and say, our problem is that people don't know about us. And so the way that we're going to increase our visibility and drive more revenue for our business is A, B, and C, right? We're going to pursue this specific strategy. And so the nature of a strategy is basically making trade-offs, right? It's saying we're going to do A and we're not going to do B. And so, to your point, then when you're looking at your content plan, or you're getting a bunch of content requests from your CEO or whatever the situation might be, you can say, this thing that they're asking for doesn't really fit into the strategy that we've all agreed on. And so, I think it works in sort of two different ways there, where, for you, it's helpful as a guide or a reminder. But it's also kind of a nice like defense mechanism in a way, where a lot of content marketers just do whatever people ask, because that's what they feel like their job is. And then that way they don't get to be strategic. They become kind of an order taker.
Yeah, you're in the hamster wheel and you can't get out. Yeah,
Yeah.
definitely. And do you have any framework or questions that you use to keep everyone focused on the strategy or to keep everything in line?
Um, hmm. I mean, I think at the very highest level, it just comes back to like, does this align with the strategy, and does this align with like the goals, or what goals does this support that we're pursuing right now? I think that's probably the most important one. And then I think like how does this kind of roll up into the bigger picture? That's the other thing to keep in mind about like a content marketing strategy is a lot of times it's actually a couple of different strategies, right? Like there's not like one strategy for all of your content marketing. It's like, okay, our big goal is money in the bank, right? It's like revenue. Well, there are many different ways that you need to move people through a buying process and get them into your funnel and like do all these different things. And each of those steps a lot of times requires its own strategy, right? So you have a strategy for generating leads, and you have a strategy for nurturing those leads, and then you have a strategy for upselling your customers or whatever, right? There's a lot of different ways that we can use content as a tool. And so going back to your question, I think when you're evaluating that content, or the question that you ask, or yeah, basically like which of those strategies does it support? How does it align with the goals that we've set? And is it, I guess at the end of the day, it's also like, is it the best use of those resources, or is it, do we think it's going to win? Which that's always a guessing game. You can never tell until you do stuff sometimes. But
Yeah.
I think that's part of being a content marketer. And I think that's actually an increasingly important skill, is like the idea of just like taste and
Yeah.
like experience, and knowing, being able to look at an idea and be like, that does technically align with what we're trying to do, but I don't think that's the best way to accomplish it. Um, that's hard. I think that's one that you just learn over
Yeah.
time. You can't really teach it.
The good thing about it is it's also one that I know, like so many people, myself included, we get all this AI talk and there's a worry, and it is one of the things that's a human does that. So it's good, it's good to know that there are parts of this industry that will always need that taste level, that gut feeling of a human to be like, in paper it works, but in reality, it's probably not the right move for us, right?
Totally right. Yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, I always tell people that's like my favorite use case of AI is I'll just be like, hey, just generate like 100 versions of this thing, and then it's on me to figure out which one's good, because AI is not going to know which one is actually good. But
Yeah.
I get sort of all the bad ideas out of the way.
That's good. It's good. Nice to, yeah, you can be the filter. I'm going to ask you another question, which I think is a big pain point. I know it's a pain point for me, and from what I know, other content marketers, and it is content distribution because it's a big buzzword. We all hear it. We all know we're supposed to do it, but when it comes down to actually knowing where this content should go, it gets harder. So obviously everyone's different, but do you have any tips for helping people sort of decide where they should invest their time?
Oh man, yeah, I have a lot of thoughts on this. So first of all, I think we should sort of address like what content distribution is like fundamentally because I think it's changed.
Yeah.
So when I was really starting in content marketing and even when I was starting the agency, when we talked about content distribution, basically what that meant is how do I take a blog post and how do I get the link of that for that blog post in as many places as possible so that people click on it and come back to my website. That's what content distribution used to mean. Now I think content distribution is more like it's closer to like pure content repurposing, right? It's like how do we take the content of this content, whether it's a blog post or an ebook or whatever it is, and how do we make it work for other channels and other formats? And so it's not about generating traffic back to your website in most cases because most people are not going to click that stuff, right? We're the Amanda from SparkToro, I think, is like famously coined the idea of like zero click content. We're very much in that era, right? Where people want to see the content in the feed or wherever they are, they don't want to have to click your thing and go read your blog post. So all that being said, I think coming back to the idea of how do you approach that, how do you kind of pick your channels and figure out your strategy there? First and foremost, I think don't try to do everything. I think that's probably the number one mistake everybody makes is like, oh, well, it'd be easy to just, take
Everything.
this content, yeah, chop it up, especially, again, especially with AI, it's very tempting to do more and more and more. But a lot of times you're just, even if you're spending less time, you're still wasting time doing stuff that's not going to move the needle. So, fundamentally, the idea there should be what channels are most valuable to my audience, who am I trying to reach, and where are they spending their time, and where do they want to consume this kind of content, right? So, just because I'm a content marketer doesn't mean when I use, I don't know, TikTok, I'm looking for content marketing information. I don't know. So the idea there being which channels are going to be best suited. Pick one or two to start. You can always build on it, but start with one or two channels that you think make the most sense for your audience. And if you don't know, you can use the tool. By the way, I'm not affiliated anyway with SparkToro. I just happened to mention it twice in this interview, but I know SparkToro. Yeah, SparkToro does have some data around that. Or you can interview the people that you're trying to reach, that kind of thing, to get a sense of hey, where do you spend your time? How do you consume content? What's most valuable for you? And then the other thing that I always recommend folks is this idea that we call like anchors or like anchors and hooks. So basically, it's thinking about distribution as part of your content workflow and the actual content that you're creating. So if you sit down to write a blog post, rather than thinking like, okay, I'm going to write a blog post and then once I'm done, then I'll think about distribution. What I want you to do is like sit down and think about what are the parts, what are the components of this blog post that are going to make a great LinkedIn carousel, and how do I structure my blog post so that I can quickly sort of pull that part out and restructure it. So just an example to make that concrete, like one of the things that we do for a lot of our clients is like the structure of the article, like the headings, for example, are sort of an outline for a carousel. And so when we write the content, we're actually thinking about, okay, how do we make this work on sort of both of those levels so that the article obviously makes sense as a standalone, but we can also quickly take the headings of the bullet points and turn that into an outline, which then becomes the carousel. Or how can we take the data points in here and turn that into a data visualization that we can then put on Instagram or whatever it is. And so thinking about that ahead of time, understanding what your channels are going to be and what those formats are, and then sort of structuring your content to comprise those other content assets that you're going to derive from it, I think is a huge unlock, because then you're not trying to figure it out after the fact. Because I think that's the other problem, right? Is that when you sit down to actually do that, like repurposing or like distribution, you're like, there's nothing in here that's really good, or like it's going to make a lot of sense if I post it on LinkedIn. So like
Reverse
that,
engineer, yeah, what you're doing.
yeah, yeah. And so then you're just posting on LinkedIn to post on LinkedIn because that's the process, right? So I think that's another big one that I always recommend.
That's great advice. I definitely love that idea of starting with sort of thinking about distribution first before we even get knee deep in the blog and then realize at the end after 4 hours that maybe it's not going to be repurposed as we wanted to. And I wanted to just, before we move on, ask you a question because it is something I think that there's been a bit of discussion. Like, what's the difference between distribution and repurposing? Um, is it just at the minute now there is a difference, but does it matter? I think they're so intertwined. I don't know if you have an opinion. I think we can look for definitions, but at this point, I guess they're one of the same, right? They're at least cousins.
Yeah, I think I think most people honestly probably use those interchangeably. I mean, yeah, you could get pedantic about the difference between the two, but I mean, I wouldn't, yeah, I wouldn't spend a lot of time thinking about the difference between those two. And like I said, I think especially now, sort of the purest form of content distribution as we used to know it, I don't think is very effective at this stage. So I think pretty much all of content distribution is some form of content repurposing.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So, what one thing that there does seem to be as well is a bit of a shift, more marketing conversations happening behind closed doors. So, in Slack communities, Discord. Do you have any advice for a content team whose entire strategy has been built on public channels or has been built on, SEO? What would be the first step that you would recommend to pivot? Or do they need to pivot?
Interesting.
I know there's a lot of stress about it with GEO and AIO.
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I think I think pretty much every team right now is yeah in the process or recognize that they need to pivot or at least adjust their strategy right now, especially if they have relied primarily on SEO. So I mean, I think the first step there is probably to add like one new channel, right? Basically to figure out as we were thinking, as we were saying before, you can always expand from there, but start with one new thing that you're going to do that's not dependent on Google. You're always going to have some reliance on some channel, right? That's the way distribution works. Is that you rely on LinkedIn or you rely on Google or you rely on email, even, right? And so I think the first step is to start with one channel that you can sort of own and really figure out. And the nice thing about doing that, I think too, is that when we when we do when we rely on SEO, I think the worst instinct is that you just sort of publish content and then like the traffic rolls in and you never really have to engage with the people that you're actually trying to talk to
Yep.
which is I think frankly I think that's a lot of the reason why people love SEO, right? Because it's like, oh yeah, it's like an easy button. I just put the content on the website and people come find it, and it prints traffic or whatever. And so I think the flip side of that is that as you start to engage in these other channels, whether that's LinkedIn or Slack or Discord or whatever, wherever your audience is, as we were talking about before, you sort of have to get a little bit more face to face with the people that you're trying to talk to in a lot of cases, right? And so you get to see what are they actually talking about, what do they actually care about, how are they engaging with content, how are they not engaging with content. And so yeah, I think that's sort of the first shift that I would make is like pick one of those channels and really just figure it out. It's going to take a while. You're not going to get it right on the first try. You're going to try a lot of stuff that doesn't work, um, and then build from there.
That's good advice. And I think it is sort of interesting that we are going back to maybe more traditional market in the sense of more based on relationships than in the past. We can't hide behind SEO anymore. We gotta get back out there, network and get to know people. And good news for some, not so for others, I guess.
I was just gonna say, I think it also sort of forces us to evaluate the value of the content that we're making, right? So, to your point, if you're popping into a Slack channel, let's say our top of the funnel community, and you want to engage with our audience, you have to create something valuable that people care about, right? Like, and you're going to find out right away if they find it valuable or not. If you post something and nobody responds to it, you're
Yeah,
going to know, and so yeah, getting that like very direct feedback from the people who you're trying to reach. I think, again, it's just a valuable skill, and it's gonna, going back to the idea of like taste, it's gonna teach you really quickly about what resonates and what doesn't, and how people engage with stuff.
for sure. That's very true. And you do, it's such a helpful having that community. It's so good. And you can sort of temperature check things and just get others' opinions. So I do like that. Um, I was going to say there, I want to go on to another pain, and I think this is probably the pain I feel the most in content marketing, which is trying to prove what what I'm doing is working or has impact. So we have sort of, I guess, relied a lot with SEO and things. We've relied on metrics like number of views, even just number of articles published or position rankings in Google. that may be changing with everything that's happening. So I think it is. But in your experience, what is a smarter metric or signal that a content strategy is actually working? And how do you have any tips to get buy-in for that shift internally or to basically to prove ROI to the people with the with the purse strings?
Yeah, I mean, I'll be honest. If I had an easy solution to this, I think, I'd probably be a billionaire at this
Yeah.
point because I think it is
The six
the,
billion
the
dollar strategist.
yeah. It is the perennial pain, I think, of all content folks, and it is unfortunately only getting more difficult, right? As we get into more channels, as those channels become more difficult to measure, yeah, it's getting harder and harder. I think the most fundamental tip I have for folks is going back to the idea of like your strategy being actually a series of strategies and thinking about those as sort of a set of connected metrics and KPIs, right? So, for example, if you are creating content for communities and the goal of that strategy is really about building awareness or having people check out your website, it's probably not going to drive direct attributable revenue. So the way that you measure that part of your strategy should be fundamentally different from the way that you measure, whatever, a conversion oriented piece of content or something, right? So I think the trap that people fall into is that they expect all of their content to align with all of their metrics,
Yeah.
and that's just never really the case, right? And when you try to do that, you also make like Frankenstein content that doesn't do anything, right?
Yeah.
Because you're like, okay, well, this content's really engaging and interesting, and so it's gonna, engage my audience, but there's not a strong enough call to action, or it doesn't sell hard enough, or what, and then you start trying to chop it up or make it work on all these different levels, and then what you run into again, is you end up with sort of a piece that doesn't work on any level. So I think thinking about your content strategy is a series of strategies. Each of those strategies has a specific set of KPIs associated with it. So whether that's traffic to your website at the most basic level, or some kind of like awareness metric, or some kind of brand search traffic, or whatever it is, it's going to be different for every business. Think about that as its own piece of the strategy, and everything I do there, I'm going to measure based on that North Star metric. And then moving down the funnel, you might be okay. Well, then the next stage is leads or whatever, or like form fills on the website or whatever. Okay, so now every piece of content that I do that's oriented around that piece of the strategy, I'm going to measure based on that. And so then what you can do is you can say, okay, we did 12 top of the funnel articles and we generated, and this was the impact on overall brand awareness, right? And so then you can kind of correlate that activity. You're generally not going to be able to say like, okay, this single post had this specific impact, but you can at least say this segment of the work that we're doing seems to correlate with this effect that we're seeing in the numbers, right? And so then you can at least start to quantify that. You can, it's never going to be as granular as your CFO wants probably, but
No,
but
no
you can get a
direct
lot
line.
closer.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean,
That's
I
very
think that's the golden goose that everybody's chasing, right? Is that like I want to know if I put this on LinkedIn, how much money is it going to make me? But reality says that that's usually never possible.
yeah, I can agree. I've tried myself and it doesn't work. Is there a metric just before I sneak this little side quest question in? But is there a metric that you at the minute are feeling like, oh, this one is working better, or one that you feel like is getting more value? I've
Mm,
heard some people say recently that, for example, mentions mean more than clicks nowadays, or like. But is there a
mm.
metric that you think is maybe becoming more valuable?
Yeah, well, that's so. This is maybe a little bit of a non sequitur, but one of the things that I've been thinking a lot about recently is how we think about and measure AI, and like our visibility in AI. So let me sort of start on the other side, which I think one of the things that's not very valuable right now is like measuring pure citations. Okay, so I think that's sort of the knee jerk metric that a lot of people are looking at right now with like AI overviews and ChatGPT. Is like, okay, how many times does ChatGPT reference one of our blog posts
Yeah.
in this little sources button, right? Reality is like that's probably not very valuable long term. Like most people are never going to look at those sources. They're probably never going to click on that link. Like that, they're not even going to know that it came from your content, most likely, right? That's just not the way people interact with AI, at least at this stage. But on the flip side, something that is, the obvious thing that is very valuable from an AI perspective is like how many times does ChatGPT recommend our business by name, right? And so if if I go out and I say, what's the best content marketing agency, does it say Optimist, right? That's the thing that I want to know. And so I think, when we think about AI right now and how to measure it, I think that's the number one thing that most people should be caring about. Unfortunately, I think a lot of people are measuring citations because it's easier and you can do it like programmatically and things. So again, maybe that's a little bit of a non sequitur, but I think those two things are maybe a couple things to think about.
Yeah.
The other thing too that's really interesting to me and is extremely hard to measure, but is fundamentally perhaps the most valuable thing when we think about AI is like if you have sort of a novel idea or framework or solution to a problem that your audience is experiencing, can you get an LLM to talk about that or to tell people that that's the way that they should be thinking about it? So can you sort of influence the actual substance of the LLM's output? The example I'll use because I was just talking to somebody about this is there's a very well known SEO agency owner named Mike King, and he's been talking about this idea of relevance engineering, which
Oh.
not like 100% bought into his version of this, but he sort of coined this idea, right, as like a way of thinking about sort of the future of AI and search. And so, an example of that would be, if you go to Google and you say, hey, how do I increase my visibility in AI? If the LLM says, hey, you should think about this idea of relevance engineering, here's how it works, right? That's super valuable, right? Because now Mike King owns that idea. And
Mm.
now ChatGPT is directing people, basically sending people directly into his funnel, right? They're sending people directly to him. So I think that's actually honestly like the future. And I think people haven't really been thinking about that. It's going to be, like I said, it's going to be really hard to measure,
Yeah.
unfortunately. But I think
Oh, yeah.
that's sort
Here
of the
we
way
go
that we're
again.
going is, yeah, yeah, yeah. So that's a complicate the metrics discussion even further, but yes.
That's super interesting, actually. I think that's really cool. Because I think at the minute there's the scramble we're all under, like, how do we, but again, we're focusing on citations and mentions, but yeah, actually make coining something and owning it in the LLMs. It's super cool. And
Yeah.
when you in your course, I'm gonna flip to your course so that you've launched. Is there, I don't know if you've had any feedback yet, but is there a section or step or part of the course that content marketers are saying, yeah, this is actually the thing I'm really struggling with? Like, do we know what they're
Mm.
saying, what they're feeling, temperature check, what's going on? Please don't take the
Yeah, so I should preface that by just saying that the course that you're talking about, the six figure strategist, that course has actually kind of been around for a while in different versions. So we've been continuing to update it and stuff. But I think the main thing that people are finding like most valuable right now or sort of learning and taking away from that course is actually like all of the prerequisite work, right? So the whole idea of the course is that's going to teach you how to build a content marketing strategy. In this case, it's really like a sort of an SEO focused content strategy. But a lot of the pre work is like figuring out what matters to your audience,
Mhm.
right? And so we use like a jobs to be done framework essentially to kind of go through and think about what are our audience pain points, what are they actually trying to solve, how does our business actually solve that particular problem, and then really breaking it down and getting super in the weeds about like what are the specific features or functionality of our product and how does it directly align or solve some specific pain point or help somebody solve a specific problem. And so I think that is a universal skill set for marketers in general and especially content folks. So no matter if we're thinking about AI or we're thinking about LinkedIn or whatever it is, being able to think in terms of like the pain points and connecting the dots between what do we actually do as a business and how does it actually help the people we're trying to sell to. I think that system, that process is the thing that I probably get the most feedback on because again, most people jump straight to how do I do the keyword research? How do I, reverse engineer what my competitors are doing? And they haven't even thought about that piece of it yet. And so there's no foundation for their strategy. And so I think that's where people get a lot of value.
That makes a lot of sense. Yeah, get the blueprint, get the foundations right. Awesome. So, before I let you go, thank you. I've learned a lot. There's been some really interesting things in there, but I did want to ask you, where can people stay in touch with you if they want to join the top of funnel community, if they want to work with Optimist, they want to take a course, where can they find you?
Yeah, first of all, would love to have you as a member of Top of the Funnel. It's 100% free to join. Just go to jointofu.co, and you can sign up there to join. That would be the best place to see me and interact with me on a day-to-day basis. You can also find me on LinkedIn. Just search for Tyler Hakes. I'm sure you'll be able to find me there. And then, yeah, Optimist, the content marketing agency, you can find us at yesoptimist.com.
Perfect. Yesoptimist.com. Awesome. Well, Tyler, thank you so much for waking up and seeing me first thing in the morning and answering my myriad of questions. It's been incredible. I've learned a lot, and I hope you have a lovely day. Thank you.
Thanks so much for having me, Nikki. It was a
Uh,
pleasure.
Thank you.